listening to Proof Text, a Glossa House podcast by Dr. T. Michael W. Halcomb, Dr. Frederick J. Long, Dr. Mario Melendez, Dr. Jennifer Noonan, and J. M. Smith. Welcome and enjoy.
Hey, welcome to Proof Text. I'm Dr. Mario, and this is what we call What's in the Name. We've been walking through different names that are attributed to books of the Bible. And so we've been considering them in order that we have it in our canon. So we looked at Joshua and Samuel and Esther and Nehemiah. These other names are beautiful, and I hope that you get something out of it, even though we're not spending much time in these names. Three things that we look for whenever we translate a name in the Bible is, number one, what is the etymology of the name? Number two, what is the irony or poignancy of the name in the story? And number three, what is the theological impact? And most of the time we have to jump over to the New Testament for us. Theological impact for us. Today's name that we're going to talk about is Job. I once was talking with a friend who had immigrated from Germany. He has moved on to another town, and he and I don't talk very often. We did doctorate work together. But he made a statement that was really interesting to me. He said, why was everybody in the Empire Strikes Back of Star Wars, why is everybody surprised that Darth Vader says that he's Luke's father? And I thought, because we didn't know that. To which my friend who grew up in Germany goes, but his name is Father. I said, what? He says, yeah. Vader, Darth Father, Vader. Oh, so he and his family who saw Star Wars in Europe were never surprised whenever they finally got to Empire Strikes Back and he says, I am your father, that phrase that we know. They weren't surprised by that. Likewise, this is what we're doing in this series. As you experience and you start translating names or you hear names, you really shouldn't be surprised whenever you read the story and you go, that's what's happening. Insert our name of the day, Job. Now, if you're a student of the Bible like me, you probably have read the book over and over and over again and been quite frustrated on Job's behalf because you're like, man, what did this guy do to deserve this? And the answer is he did nothing to deserve it. But just as my friend who spoke German was not surprised by Vader being Luke's father, none of my Hebrew-speaking friends, be they in the United States or in Israel, are surprised at the struggles that Job has, because Job's name in Hebrew, which is Yov, okay, it literally means to be persecuted or hated. To be persecuted or hated. I rather wish that I knew that long ago whenever I begun studying the Bible, academically speaking, at Samford University or Union or any of the places that I've attended. This just right at the outset goes, oh, this is not going to be good for him. And so whenever it opens up and there was a man that lived in the land of Uz whose name was Job, we should hit pause and go, we know what's about to happen to him. So etymologically, his name means to be persecuted or to be hated. Well, how does that play out in his story? It plays out in his story because, of course, if you haven't read the opening few chapters of Job, I would encourage you to do that. Chapters 1 through 3 should do the trick for you, but then jump to the end of the book to see the restoration of him. But the persecution that he goes through is from the Satan. It's from his wife. It's from his friends. This is not just persecution, and it's not persecution that is from God. And so this is really interesting whenever we etymologically understand his name means to suffer or to be persecuted, right? And then we look at who does the persecuting. It's not God. And in fact, I would even say that that's something that we'll get to in a minute, but we could jump over to the New Testament, to James, and say, it's not we being tested by God, but it is we ourselves who, through our own desire, leads to temptation, and temptation leads to lust, and lust leads to sin. So it's not persecution from Yahweh, but rather persecution from other peoples. And so as we look at this and we consider it, let's consider the three different groups of people that persecute him. Number one, the Satan. I like to, in my undergrad classes for my students, pop that bubble and go, no, this is not the devil in this text. If you really want more on this, I would really encourage you to read a book that I greatly appreciate in regards to how he walks through this and talks about the ancient culture. But Ryan Stokes wrote a book that's called The Satan, How God's Executioner Became the Enemy. It's a really good short read that will help you understand that Satan is not devil always. It's more in the case of like a prosecuting attorney in a courthouse. We don't necessarily view a prosecuting attorney as evil. It's their job to, quote unquote, try to verify the truth within the court situation. Either the person's guilty or not, right? And so this is what's happening here. He is prosecuting Job. He is testing Job, let's put it that way, right? He is trying to verify, is this man a holy and righteous man, as Job chapter 1 begins. And so persecution, under the first concept here, persecution could be a means of verifying holiness in your life. Holiness in your life. Testing, right, is another way that the New Testament prefers to put it. Testing your faith. That's a wonderful way to put it here. Persecution is on the nose as far as Job's name, but it's testing in New Testament theological realms, right? So number one, the Lord will allow us to be tested, not necessarily by himself, but tested to verify our holiness. Number two, Job gets persecuted and tested, dare I say, hated is probably the best word, by his wife. One of my students a few years ago here at Oklahoma Baptist University rightly put it, I'm so glad we don't know her name, because if she was in heaven, it would be quite awkward whenever we ran into her, because the only phrase that we have from this woman is curse God and die. Oh man, what a difficult thing. So she was hating her husband. Theologically, we could jump this over to the New Testament, and Jesus puts it this way in one of his sermons. He says, behold, if you believe in me, I will put enmity between father and son, mother and daughter, brothers, husbands and wives. We see this enmity coming about because Job is holy, because he's doing what is right, and because he's being tested in his faith. Even his closest confidant, his wife, was unable to see that. And so that's the second instance where we see his name of being persecuted or hated really coming forth. The third that we see is from Job's friends. I rather like how many of our English translations put it after Job's friends accuse him of three things, either gold, let me put it this way, the three G's as I like to teach it: gold, girls, or glory. Which one are you culpable of, Job? And he says none of these, and he has a great defense to each one of those. But then Job returns to his friends and says in Job 19:22, why do you persecute me as God does? Now, this is not the name Yov here. This is not to be persecuted in that sense. It's a different word. It's radaf. And so we could translate that as being test or I don't know, bemoan, or maybe why do you deal with me harshly? But I like how a lot of our English Bibles actually caught this. And I think it's wordplay that Job's name is persecute, and now Job is accusing his friends of persecuting him. Though it's not the same word in Hebrew, I think the etymological and theological is coming to play here. Why do you persecute me as God does? He carries on and he says, will you never get enough of my flesh? So the first person that we see persecuting Job in the story is the Satan. The second is the wife. And the third is these friends. These friends are very interesting, complex characters. Some people often jump to it and say, man, these aren't friends that you want. I would say if we were to do some dabbling in regards to the numbers that we see there, it says that they sat with him for 7 days. Seven is a hyperbolic number. Seven is a stylized number, I think is how Sandy Richter puts it. And in this instance, seven means the perfect, right? Seven is perfection, six is not. They waited the perfect amount of time before they began asking these persecutory questions of Job. And so I tend to wonder, in the life of a believer, our friends from the outside aren't often going to understand why we're going through what we're going through. And those that are not walking with us and those that don't know the holiness in our lives will often say, man, what sin are you hiding? What are you doing wrong? Etc., etc. If we were to grab this and now bring it over to the New Testament after these three views of persecution, let's consider John 15. John 15 and 19 through 20, Jesus is talking, right? If you were of the world would love you as its own. And that's exactly what we see in Job's story. If Job just was doing what he thought, then, or what the friends thought, then it might have been easier for him to have a rebuttal to them, like, yeah, man, I screwed up. I kept a lot of gold instead of giving it to the offering plate. Something along those lines, right? But Jesus says, if you're of the world would love you as its own. But because you're not of the world, but I chose you out of the world, therefore the world will hate you. Remember the word that I said to you, a servant is not greater than his master. And if they persecute me, they will also persecute you. If they keep my word, they will also keep yours. Here's the interesting thing. Whenever we teach the book of Job, one of the loose things that I like to tell people is oftentimes we will not know why. As we walk through the book of Job, right, his name means persecute. That's etymology. He's persecuted by three different people, or three different groups of people, Satan, his wife, and his friends. At the very end, he does get it restored, but we never see Yahweh reveal to Job why. And so one of the loose applications of Job's name that I give to all my students and people whenever I was pastoring at a church is that sometimes things are going to happen in life and I'm not going to be able to tell you why. And you may not know why. You might go to your grave like Job and not know why. But on the other hand, Jesus there in John 15 gives us a different sense that when you are persecuted for holiness' sake, if we were to channel Beatitudes, right? Blessed are you if you're persecuted for holiness' sake. John 15 tells us that the life of a believer when persecuted is because we're not of this world. And I think we could potentially superimpose that back over the life of Job and say, Job's life was not the norm. In fact, we see that in Job chapter 1, because he's called holy, right? Righteous. Have you tried my servant Job, says Yahweh. And so because he's not of the world standard, the norm, he is persecuted. I think that could be read then over into John and say this. Like Job, if we lead a life that is different, stand out and unique, something that is praiseworthy of heaven, dare I say, we might be persecuted. Jesus says he was sending us out like sheep to the slaughter. It's not exactly the most ferocious of all the animals to be a mascot. Nevertheless, like Job, we are to be persecuted if indeed we live for holiness' sake, as he says in the Beatitudes. And so this is the etymology, the application, and the irony of Job's name for us today. Hope you enjoy that. Go reread through the book of Job again. Consider his name in regards to persecution, and then superimpose that over to the New Testament and ask, how does Job help us see persecution and holiness from the New Testament text? All right, I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.
Interested in growing your ancient language skills but not sure where to start? Glossa House can help. From illustrated readers and short stories to lexicons and grammars, Glossa House offers a variety of resources for beginning, intermediate, and experienced ancient language learners. Head to glossahouse.com today. Glossa House, language resources for the global community.